Queens, New York. Inside the Ravenite Social Club, John Gotti speaks openly, unaware a federal microphone is recording every word above him. By the late 1980s, the Gambino crime family operated as a structured system. Orders moved through layers, money through businesses, leadership stayed hidden. Gotti changed that. He stepped into public view. Courtrooms, cameras, reputation, he used them as tools. But visibility creates patterns. Patterns can be followed, and once followed, they can be proven. Because the man who made fear visible also showed exactly how to destroy it. Subscribe for real underworld stories built on facts, not fiction. Before the spotlight, the invisible system, before John Gotti ever became a public figure, the Gambino crime family operated more like a disciplined corporation than a street gang. Its strength came from structure, not personality. Nothing moved in a straight line. Orders were never passed directly from the top to the bottom. A boss spoke to a small group of captains. Those captains passed instructions down to soldiers. Each level only knew what it needed to know. Information was controlled, separated, and often deliberately incomplete. If one part of the system was exposed, the rest stayed protected. The business side followed the same logic. Revenue came from multiple streams: construction contracts, union influence, trucking routes, gambling operations, and other illicit markets. Many of these were tied to legitimate industries. On paper, they looked like normal businesses. In practice, they were controlled points of income. Money did not sit in one place. It moved. Cash flowed through layers: front companies, small businesses, and trusted intermediaries. There were no formal ledgers that could be easily seized. Records were kept in memory or coded in ways that meant nothing outside the circle. This made the system harder to map, harder to prove, and harder to dismantle. Distance was the key. A boss who stayed removed from daily operations could not be directly linked to crimes. Law enforcement could arrest individuals at the lower levels, but the structure absorbed the impact. Replacements were already in place. The system continued. Fear existed, but it was controlled and internal. It was tied to rules, protocol, hierarchy, discipline. If someone stepped out of line, the response was calculated, not to create noise, but to maintain order. This was not chaos. It was design, and it depended on one principle above everything else. The man at the top must remain out of sight. The decision that broke the rules, the moment everything changed, did not come quietly. It came in full public view. Outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, Paul Castellano stepped out of his car and was immediately surrounded by gunmen. The attack was fast, controlled, and unmistakable. Within minutes, one of the most powerful figures in organized crime was gone. But the killing itself was only part of the shift. What mattered more was how it happened and who allowed it to happen. Castellano had followed the traditional model. He kept distance from the street, relied on structure, and focused on high-level operations like construction and union control. To some within the family, especially those working closer to day-to-day operations, that distance created resentment. It felt like leadership without presence. John Gotti understood that tension. By organizing the assassination without approval from the commission, the governing body that regulated decisions between families, he did more than remove a boss. He broke a system rule that had held for decades. Leadership was no longer just about structure. It became about control in real time. And then came the second move. Gotti did not disappear after taking power. He made himself visible. He stood outside the Ravenite Social Club. He spoke openly. He allowed cameras to capture him, walking into courtrooms, surrounded by attention. This was a different kind of authority. Fear was no longer confined inside the organization. It was projected outward. Businesses, rivals, and even parts of the system began responding not just to orders, but to the presence of the man giving them. But visibility changes the rules in another way. Because when power becomes visible, it also becomes traceable. Fear as a public asset. Once John Gotti stepped into power, fear stopped operating quietly inside the structure. It moved into public view, and that changed how it worked. Courtrooms became part of the system. Each appearance was controlled. Tailored suits, calm posture, measured expressions. Cameras captured everything. When charges didn't hold, it reinforced something more powerful than a legal outcome. It built the idea that he could move through the system untouched. That idea spread. On the street, visibility changed behavior before words were spoken. Businesses cooperated faster. Rivals hesitated longer. Inside the organization, presence replaced distance. Crews saw authority up close. That visibility created pressure without constant enforcement. Fear became efficient. But visibility also created something else: patterns. And those patterns were being recorded. Federal investigators had already begun building a case using long-term surveillance, including conversations captured near the Ravenite Social Club. Those recordings would later become central evidence, confirming how openly decisions were being discussed. What looked like control from the outside was becoming traceable from the inside. Because once fear becomes visible, it stops being contained. It becomes something that can be studied and eventually used against the system itself. If this breakdown is helping you see the system clearly, subscribe for more. The business behind the image. The public image suggested power centered around one man. The reality operated through structure. Behind the attention surrounding John Gotti, the Gambino crime family continued functioning as a layered enterprise. The headlines followed visibility. The revenue depended on systems that did not. Construction remained one of the strongest foundations. Control over unions meant control over labor. Who worked, who didn't, and how quickly a project moved could all be adjusted without direct confrontation. Contracts could be influenced before they were even signed. Delays could be created or removed. Entire developments shifted based on decisions made far from the job site. Trucking and waste management extended that control outward. Routes were not just about movement. They were leverage. Access to certain areas, timing of deliveries, and continuity of service all depended on networks that appeared legitimate from the outside. Underneath, portions of revenue were quietly redirected, shared upward, and protected through layers of intermediaries. Cash-based operations added another layer: gambling. Loan networks and other off-the-books markets generated steady income that avoided formal oversight. But cash alone was not enough. It had to be absorbed. Small businesses, restaurants, clubs, service companies acted as entry points, blending illicit income into everyday transactions. What looked routine carried a different origin. None of this was random. Each part had a defined role. Each role connected upward. Responsibility moved in one direction. Money moved in another. Discipline kept both aligned. If one area faced pressure, others continued without interruption. The image of power drew attention. The structure of business ensured survival. And that structure did not depend on who stood in front of cameras. The state responds from the inside. As John Gotti became more visible, the response from institutions began to shift in a more deliberate direction. Agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigation moved beyond isolated arrests and short-term cases. The focus turned toward understanding the structure itself, how authority moved, how decisions were approved, and how money flowed through the system. Visibility made that possible. Meetings could be tracked. Associations became clearer. Patterns started to form. What had once appeared fragmented, separate crews, separate operations, began to connect into a single framework. Investigators were no longer looking at individual actions. They were mapping relationships. The strategy required patience. Surveillance extended over long periods. Conversations were recorded, not for immediate use, but to build context. Locations were monitored repeatedly. Informants were positioned carefully, chosen for access rather than speed. Each detail added another layer to the understanding of how the organization functioned. The goal changed. Instead of reacting after crimes occurred, the focus shifted to identifying how they were organized in advance. Who gave approval? Who managed distribution? Who benefited from each operation? The structure itself became the target, and centralization created a weakness. The more authority appeared to flow through one visible figure, the easier it became to trace decisions back to a single point. What once provided control began to create exposure, because once a system is understood from the inside, it no longer needs to be attacked directly. It can be taken apart piece by piece. The fracture of loyalty. Pressure does not break a system all at once. It settles on the point that can no longer absorb it. For John Gotti, that point was inside. Sammy Gravano stood close to the center, trusted, informed, and fully exposed to how decisions moved. As investigations tightened, that exposure became risk. Wiretaps, surveillance, and growing legal pressure began closing the distance that once protected leadership. Conversations turned into evidence. Meetings turned into connections. The structure that once absorbed pressure started concentrating it. Gravano saw it clearly. Inside the organization, fear enforced discipline. It maintained order, but it was never designed to compete with external pressure backed by long prison sentences and federal prosecution. The balance shifted. Loyalty became conditional, not because the system weakened, but because the cost of staying inside it became too clear to ignore. Gravano chose to cooperate. His testimony did not just describe events. It explained the structure, how authority worked, how orders moved, how decisions were made. It translated the internal system into something prosecutors could present clearly. That was the fracture, because once someone at that level speaks, silence is no longer guaranteed. And once silence breaks, control begins to weaken from within. The trial that broke the system. By the time John Gotti entered the courtroom as a defendant, the case against him had already moved beyond individual actions. It was no longer about isolated incidents. It was about structure. Prosecutors had shifted their approach. They were not trying to prove one crime at a time. They were presenting a connected system, one that showed how decisions were made, how authority was exercised, and how operations were carried out under a single chain of control. That chain now led directly to one point. For years, the strength of the organization depended on separation. Orders passed through layers. Responsibility was distributed. No single person could be easily tied to everything. That distance created protection. But visibility had changed that design. As Gotti became more central, more present, and more directly involved, the separation narrowed. Conversations linked to actions. Actions linked to outcomes. The path from decision to execution became easier to follow. The trial exposed that path in full. Testimony from Sammy Gravano filled in the internal structure. Recordings added context. Surveillance confirmed patterns. Each piece connected to another until the system could be presented clearly, without gaps. And once that clarity existed, the outcome followed. Gotti's conviction showed something beyond the case itself. It revealed a structural weakness that when authority becomes too centralized and too visible, the entire system becomes tied to that point. Control had created efficiency, but it had also created vulnerability. The return to silence after the conviction of John Gotti. The adjustment was immediate, not in public, but within the structure. The Gambino crime family did not collapse. It recalibrated. The lesson was clear. Visibility had provided short-term influence, but it had also made the system easier to understand, easier to track, and ultimately easier to target. The response was not to abandon operations, but to change how they were presented. Leadership moved back into the background. Public appearances became limited. Communication returned to layered channels, where information passed through controlled steps rather than direct contact. Decisions were again separated from execution. The distance that once defined the system was restored. Operations continued. Revenue still flowed through construction, unions, transportation, and other controlled sectors. Cash-based markets still generated income that moved through businesses designed to absorb it. The difference was not in what the system did, but in how visible it allowed itself to be. Silence became strategy again. Without a central figure drawing attention, patterns became harder to detect. Investigations required more time. Connections were less direct. The structure regained some of the protection it had lost. This was not a retreat driven by weakness. It was an adaptation shaped by experience, because the system had tested a different model, one built on visible fear and public presence, and the outcome showed its limits. In the end, the most stable form of power was the one that remained out of sight. The bottom line: what Goodfellas got wrong? Goodfellas showed a world driven by impulse, fast money, sudden violence, unstable men chasing power they barely controlled. It made the system feel chaotic. But John Gotti was not chaos. He was structure made visible. The real system was never built on unpredictability. It was built on discipline, hierarchy, and control. Money moved with purpose. Decisions followed order. Even fear had a function. It kept the system stable. What Gotti changed was not the system itself, but how it appeared. He brought something hidden into the open. He turned authority into something people could see, measure, and react to. And in doing that, he revealed how the system actually worked. That visibility created power, and then it destroyed it. Because once a system becomes visible, it can be understood. And once it is understood, it can be taken apart. So, the question is not whether Gotti was feared. It is this: was fear ever meant to be seen at all? If you want more real stories built on facts, not fiction, subscribe for more.